In this video, I'm going to recap one of a horror thriller films from 2019, titled Ready or Not. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The film opens with two brothers, Daniel and Alex Ladomas, running scared along the halls of a mansion. Daniel hides his brother inside a cupboard, right when a man in a wedding suit begs for his help. But instead of helping him, Daniel yells, "He's in here!" No, God, no! The rest of the Ladomas family enter the room, and another arrow is shot at the man, while the bride, Helene, begs for them to stop. When the man gets dragged away, Helene tries to compose herself and resign to the situation. We then skip to 30 years later, where Grace sits in her wedding dress inside Alex Ladomas' room. She's getting married to Alex Ladomas today. Despite the fact that his family seem to dislike her because they think she's after their money, Grace, who is genuinely in love with Alex, cannot wait to be a part of the family. Before the wedding, Alex tells her in a serious manner that it's not too late to back out, but Grace kisses him to reassure that she is determined. They then proceed to the courtyard, where Grace gets her wedding pictures taken. Here, we get introduced to the odd members of the Ladomas family, the creepy Aunt Helene, the rugged brother Daniel and his arrogant wife Charity, the entitled father Tony and the sweet mother Becky. Now that we're all acquainted with most of the side characters, let's move on with the story. And so, the wedding commences and the newlyweds walk down the aisle together happily. After a night of partying, the two retreat to Daniel's room, but just as Grace thought they could finally have some time alone, and Helene turns up and tells them that the rest of the family is waiting for them. Seeing that Grace is palpably confused, Alex explains that the Ladomas family has a tradition to welcome someone new into their family, which is that at midnight after the wedding, the newcomer, which is Grace in this case, has to play a game with the rest of the family, in honor of the Ladomas family's distinguished board game company. Grace seems excited. Shortly after, she heads downstairs to the music room, where the rest of the family is waiting. Becky, aka Alex's mom, comes up to Grace, and pleads for her to convince Alex to stay close to the family from now on, and finally take his rightful mantle as the heir apparent of the Ladomas dominion, continuing the legacy. Grace seems perplexed but agrees to this. Here, we also get introduced to Alex's crack addict sister Emily, along with her opportunist husband, Fitch, and their two children who just arrived. After the children get tucked into bed by a servant, Tony Ladomas leads them to the game room, recounts their family history, as well as the rules of the game. Long story short, their ancestor Victor Ladomas met a magic man called Mr. LaBelle, who gave him a mysterious box. Subsequent to this event, the Ladomas received an immense amount of donation from Mr. LaBelle. In Mr. LaBelle's honor, they decided to play a game with this box whenever they're about to welcome a new member to the family. The rule is simple. A blank card is inserted to the box, and then Mr. LaBelle would decide which game they should play for the night. Now all Grace has to do is pull out the card and read it out loud.
It says hide and seek. Are we really gonna play that?
Alex looks uneasy, and the air around the room suddenly changes. Grace, who is still playful and blissfully unaware of her upcoming plight, is told to go hide, while the rest of the family count to 100 and go seek. Tony Ladomas also convinces her that they are going to turn off all the security cameras, because they're big on traditions and want to play the game just like in the olden days.
Good luck.
Grace then goes to hide, while the rest of the family except for Alex begin to arm themselves with old weapons.
Ready or not?
Grace decides to hide inside a dumbwaiter, while back in the game room, Alex looks torn. He is advised to remain inside the room while the rest of the family go hunt Grace. Charity is tasked to watch the door to keep Alex inside. Unbeknownst to Charity, Alex decides to sneak away through a hidden door that leads to the servants' corridor. It doesn't take long before Charity steps inside, and finds Alex gone. Back inside the dumbwaiter, Grace is bored of waiting. She steps out and evades a servant, who is apparently looking for one of the children who snuck away from bed. And then, Alex pulls her to hide, right before the wandering servant enters the room looking for the missing child. But then, the servant gets shot. Emily has shot the servant dead, shocking Grace to the core. The Ladomas family check out the dead body, and reprimand Emily for mistakenly killing the servant instead of the bride. They wait until the family drag the body away before getting up. Alex breathlessly tells her that this is happening because Grace pulled the one bad card, hide and seek, making the family think that they have to kill Grace before sunrise, otherwise something bad would happen to them. The newlyweds sneak into the servants' corridor, and Grace breaks down, overwhelmed and confused. Alex explains that he didn't think she would pull that card, because it's very unlikely. He also told her that although he preferred to live together with her without ever getting married, he knew that Grace wanted the reassurance and wanted something concrete, hence he proposed to her. He promises he would protect her now, and tells her to go down this hallway and exit through the kitchen, while he goes to the security room to unlock all the doors. The couple part ways, and Grace decides to rip the skirt of her wedding dress, making it easier for her to walk. At the end of the hall, she comes across two doors, and blindly picks the left one, which leads her here. She turns around to run and faces the skittish Emily, who begins shooting blindly.
Damn it!
Grace tries to escape but realizes that all the doors and windows are locked. She backs to a wall in panic and desperation, and then it is Daniel, Alex's brother. Thankfully, he only calmly passes her and grabs the whiskey on the pool table. He tells her that he doesn't want to hurt her himself, but he's going to have to call the others to get her.
I'll give you a 10-second head start.
Grace runs for her life, and Daniel yells aloud once he finished counting. One by one, the family members start to arrive at the study, only to find that Grace is of course no longer in the room. A servant bursts inside the room, and Emily again mistakenly shoots her dead.
Yeah, okay, that's okay, honey, come on.
Irritated by the situation, Helene Ladomas announces that they only have until dawn to kill Grace. To save time, Becky proposes that they should break tradition for once and use the security cameras. They finally agree, and part ways. Grace stops in front of the game room, and decides to arm herself with a shotgun in display. She goes to the kitchen door and waits for Alex to unlock the doors. However, the butler then enters the room, and Grace ducks to hide. Meanwhile, Alex has just entered the security room and he just managed to switch the cameras back on. But he cannot seem to get the doors to unlock.
Open fucking doors!
Still hiding, Grace realizes the shotgun is empty and carefully loads it, while the servant casually makes tea around her. Alex types in a series of codes, and finally manages to unlock the doors. This catches the butler's attention, and he moves towards the door while Grace sneaks up behind him with a shotgun in hand. She pulls the trigger, but nothing happens. The butler casually tells her that the ammunition is display only. She smacks the teapot on his head.
She's in here!
Alex's father, Tony Ladomas, begins pounding on the door, so Alex moves to destroy the control panel of the security cameras. When Tony finally enters, he furiously lunges at Alex, but Alex manages to pin him down.
That's my wife!
Daniel diffuses the situation, and Alex begs him to help Grace. But before Daniel gets to answer, Grace is treading along the halls, looking for a place to hide. She opens the dumbwaiter again, and finds a scared servant hiding there. But the servant begins yelling Grace's whereabouts and accidentally pushes on the dumbwaiter button, making the dumbwaiter move upwards and crush the dumb servant to death. Grace resumes running. Back in Alex's bedroom, the unconscious Alex gets handcuffed to the bed. Aunt Helene is convinced that Alex will come around, and eventually stop helping his lover once he accepts who he truly is, which is the future leader of the Ladomas. While this conversation is happening, Grace is right outside the window, listening. She decides to jump down, landing on a patch of shrub. Now that she's finally outside, she begins to run, and hides inside a barn when she sees someone with a flashlight roaming around. Turns out it is only Georgie, one of Emily's children. Grace comes out of hiding, but then, furious, Grace punches the child unconscious. She then gets shocked by a goat and falls into the ditch. Grace is surrounded by rotting corpses. She retches at the smell and struggles to climb up with an injured hand. But just as she reaches the top, the ladder collapses under her, leaving her with no choice but to use her injured hand to take grip. Unfortunately, her palm lands on a stray nail. Despite the pain, she clambers up and steps out of the ditch. She rips off her sleeve and uses it to bandage her hand. Charity catches sight of her running out of the barn, and tries shooting her but misses. She returns inside and informs the butler of Grace's whereabouts. Outside, Grace finally reaches the fence, and upon seeing a car about to pass by, she squeezes herself out while shouting help. But once she's outside, the car only drives away. Grace runs into the woods as she sees a car exiting the Ladomas residence. Turns out it is the butler, and he immediately informs his superior that Grace has escaped the premises. Tony Ladomas, along with the rest of his family, are now convinced that they're going to die by sunrise if Grace is not killed by then. To the dad's dismay, unlike the rest of the family, Daniel doesn't seem to believe in this superstition. He gets into an argument with his father, and Tony begins to doubt where his son Daniel's loyalty lies. Inside the bedroom, Alex Ladomas finally wakes up, and struggles to free himself from his handcuffs. Meanwhile, Daniel and Emily visit the barn to dispose of the dead servants' bodies. Daniel tells Emily that he thinks the entire family deserve to die, but Emily disagrees. Back to Grace, she has now come out of hiding and is running through a field, with the butler driving towards her. As he is instructed to bring Grace in alive, he eventually steps out of the car and scuffles with her on the ground. Luckily, Grace manages to choke him unconscious with a torn piece of cloth of her dress. She then takes off with the car. While driving, Grace calls a car helpline and tells the operator to call the police. The operator does as asked, but also proceeds to inform her that the car she's driving has been reported to be stolen, which as per company policy means he has to stop her from operating the car further. The car stops abruptly. Frustrated and exhausted, Grace decides to rest for a while, comforted with the knowledge that the police were called and are on their way to the scene. But then, the butler is now awake, and he shoots Grace with a sedative, knocking her out instantly. Grace wakes up tied up in the backseat of the car, while the butler drives and video calls the family. Grace smacks him repeatedly on the head, knocking him out again and causing a car crash. She survives the crash and crawls out of the car wreck. Daniel then shows up and walks up to her with a shotgun. At this point, he confesses that he doesn't want her to die, but he's too weak to fight against his family. She tries telling him that there's no way this whole curse thing is real, and that no one's going to die in the morning.
It's insane. Can't you see it's insane?
With a heavy heart, Daniel knocks her out. And his father Tony comes out from between the trees. It turns out that Tony followed Daniel here, and was secretly watching their interaction to test Daniel's loyalty. Still handcuffed, Alex gets a visit from his mother Becky, who tells him that she's convinced he will switch sides and start helping the family instead of Grace. Alex denies this and tells her he's going to keep fighting for Grace, because Grace is kind and isn't fucked up like the rest of his family. Meanwhile, the rest of the family prepare for the ritual to sacrifice Grace to Mr. LaBelle. Grace wakes up tied up to the dining table, while the rest of the family perform a satanic ritual around her. They all drink from a chalice, and Tony aims a knife at Grace, ready to kill her. Then this happens. It turns out that Daniel has poisoned his family to save Grace. He unties her binds, and takes her away from the room. Back in the bedroom, Alex finally manages to escape too. Daniel and Grace now venture the halls to escape, but are stopped by Daniel's wife Charity, who points a gun at them. Realizing Daniel's not going to hand over Grace, Charity shoots him on the throat. As a result, the angered Grace faces off against Charity and manages to knock her out, before checking on the dying Daniel. He tells her to go.
Thank you.
Grace continues on her way, and this time she is stopped by the father, Tony Ladomas. She reaches for a lantern and knocks him out with it before throwing the lantern to the ground and running away. Alex looks for Grace, but happens upon his dying brother instead. Daniel dies in his arms, and it is clear that his death affects him greatly. Inside the dining room, Becky the mother finds Grace, and the two begin to scuffle on the floor. Sick and frustrated, Grace beats her skull repeatedly and kills her, right when Alex walks in the room. Alex walks up to Grace, grieving and shaken, and reaches for her.
She's in here!
After finding her brother and mother dead, Alex is now overtaken by anger and has decided to switch sides. The rest of the family enter the room, and they prepare to perform the ritual again. Unbeknownst to them, the fire started by the lantern earlier is beginning to spread all around the mansion. They hold Grace down on the dining table, and Alex moves to stab her on the chest.
Hail Satan!
Grace swerves away from the knife, and manages to slip away from their grip. Fortunately for her, a ray of light slips through the gap between the curtains, revealing that their time is up since it is morning already. The rest of the family shriek away from the sunlight out of fear for whatever curse is supposed to befall them.
Nothing's happening.
It seems that the Ladomas are fine after all. But Aunt Helene is still adamant that Grace must die. She takes an axe and spontaneously combusts. After Helene, one by one of the Ladomas family starts to spontaneously combust.
I'm in control!
Grace begins laughing in a morbid manner while Alex walks up to her like a scared little boy, begging for comfort from her. Grace of course already despises him at this point, and wants a divorce. A misty figure of a man briefly shows up at the far end of the dining table. It is Mr. LaBelle. Covered in blood and grime, Grace walks out of the burning mansion and lights a cigarette on the front stoop, right when officers arrive and ask her what happened to her, to which she simply answers,
In-laws.